how are you? Welcome on in.
Podcast by George.
Another podcast by George.
Podcast by George. Border to border. Coast to coast. Podcast by George.
Well, hello, hi, how are you? Welcome on in to another podcast by George. Big show today. You know, you could make an argument that it's the biggest show that I've ever done. I'm coming in my 6th year now with podcast by George, but Julian Assange is in that extradition hearing over in London right now. It's in court. It's going on. What do they call it? X day or day X over there in London. I mean, this could change everything forever, at least through my lifetime, at least to this point in American history. If they can charge that dude and bring him over here to the United States on espionage charges, he's not an American citizen. He's never worked here before. I mean, these are just some of the problems. I can't believe that this is under consideration, particularly after the United States and that Mike Pompeo, that big bag of guts, threatened to kill him when Trump was in office. We're going to get to all of that. We're going to talk about it. I'm a little wound up, as you can imagine. I hope that you saw the promo for today, Fighting for Freedom, for Assange, and for us. And anytime you see us in my graphics, folks, that means U.S. also. That's what it's for us. It's for the U.S. Let's do our proper introductions here. Now, this first guest that we're going to have on today is Captain Matthew Ho. Everybody knows about Matt. He's been on my show a lot. He's an old buddy. He's an old pal. Love this guy. Former USMC captain and State Department officer and the Eisenhower Media Network Associate Director. Matthew Ho is an Iraq War veteran, an Afghanistan State Department officer. He's a 100% disabled veteran and a senior fellow emeritus with the Center for International Policy. He's with the Eisenhower Media Network, but most importantly for today's show, he's an advisory board member for the Committee to Defend Julian Assange and Civil Liberties. And as I mentioned, most importantly to me, he's a friend and a frequent guest on Podcast by George. Okay, also joining us today, a new friend, a new pal. It's Kelley Lane, folks. She co-hosts with Matthew Ho, Candidates for Assange. Now, this is something that she's created, an online discussion of candidates who are running for office and are ready to join the current elected officials who have stood up for freedom of the press and who have demanded the political persecution of Julian Assange to come to an end, finally, for God's sake. So let's click a couple of buttons here and put that over there and bring this to the stage and say good morning to Kelley, and then we'll say good morning to this guy here. There's Matthew Ho. Good morning, folks.
Hi. Good morning. Good to see you, George.
Yeah, thanks for coming on in here. Yeah, I don't know if this, I don't know how to make good news out of this. Matt and I traded a couple of emails about this earlier, but everybody's hoping that Julian Assange will not be extradited to the United States, yet he's still being held in Belmarsh, which has been likened to Guantanamo, this maximum security hellhole in London. And it's so problematic that this trial is underway. And let me bring this up on screen. This is from Consortium News. Court's in session. No sign of Assange. I mean, where is he? Why isn't he in court? Let's bring our guest back to a fuller screen here. Kelley, maybe you can tell us what's going on here. Are you worried about Julian Assange and where he's at and what his health is?
Well, certainly his health is not good. What we've heard is that he was coughing so violently that he broke a rib. But his last appearance when he was in court, he didn't look good. Of course, it also sort of makes people some speculation kind of grow. Like, where is he? I mean, we just had Navalny die in prison, and I mean that's a real fear. So yeah, it's not good that he's not there for whatever reason it is. It's his own it's his own case. He should be there.
And Matt and I have talked about this before, Matt, and you can expand upon this a little bit. When I think about him being in solitary confinement, particularly, but just being confined like this for the number of years, starting with that Ecuadorian embassy and now in Belmarsh, I'm reminded of the fact that solitary confinement is a torture. It's a means of torture. It's a very brutal form of torture, actually. And then I'm reminded of the fact, and I heard this when I was a kid. I don't know if it's true or not. There's so much racism attached to everything, but I heard as a kid that Native Americans do not do well when they're imprisoned because that's not their world. That they're of the land, they're of the outdoors. I mean, they struggle mightily and they can die simply from being imprisoned. Now, that's what I heard as a kid, but all of this comes into play with Julian Assange and his health. People think, well, what's the matter with him? Has he got a bug? Has he contracted something? Is he faking it? Hell no. He's suffering the consequences of being in solitary confinement and imprisonment, Matt.
Right. And it's solitary confinement. It's a recognized form of torture in this country, in the U.S. We laugh it off. We think it's just a chance for people to sit in the cooler, as they used to call it. And, if you remember Steve McQueen in The Great Escape, throw a baseball against the wall for a few days, right? But it is the effects of solitary are well known and understood. And again, recognized as torture by pretty much all competent authorities on this. I recall, if people remember the Netflix TV show Orange is the New Black. And I thought that show did a great service in showing how brutal solitary confinement was, that all the guards had to do was threaten the prisoners with going to solitary for a week. And the prisoners would immediately back down. They'd stop what they're doing. They'd give up their accomplice, whatever the goal was for the prison guard. Threatening solitary was enough to get the prisoner to comply. And so, the effects of solitary are, again, they're enormous, and both in terms of what it does to a person's physical health, but you can easily imagine what it does to to mental, emotional, and spiritual health. And so to talk about Julian today, being in this confinement, being ill, being physically wrecked by these 12 years of persecution, which weren't just simply he was sitting in the Ecuadorian embassy unmolested. There was constant surveillance, constant intrusion. He was constantly being watched and monitored. Can you imagine what that would do to somebody, again, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, as well as physically? And then, of course, the last 5 years in Belmarsh. And just to kind of, make it that much worse, he's not even able to watch these proceedings from his prison cell. There's no video link. And actually, the whole situation there is just egregious in how sloppy this is and how negligent and incompetent it is by the British authorities, because they've had to suspend the hearing a couple times now, not just because the journalists in another room couldn't hear what was being said, but people in the chamber, people actually present there with the lawyers and the judges, couldn't hear what was being said. So this whole thing is just a complete farce. It's a travesty. And if it goes forward in years' time, when people look back on this, they will say, wow, this almost was scripted the way it played out.
Yes, scripted indeed. Now, Kelley, you're newer to my show. Matt knows I talk all the time about, are they too dumb or are they in on it? And it comes from that movie Casino that I'm a fan of, and Robert De Niro talking about the slot machine manager that gets his slot machines rolled twice in a row for grand jackpots. And, you can't be this dumb, or you're in on it. And in either event, you can't work here. Well, with this audio thing, with this video feed, whatever the hell it is, it's supposed to be coming out of that courtroom that Matt's talking about. Is this by accident or is this by design in your mind?
I think it's absolutely by design. There's no excuse for it. I have been able, I'm sure Matt has too, watching it on Twitter in real time. Consortium News, Stefania Marizzi, several people are in there. Thank goodness. They're heroes for reporting on this live. But I'm switching back and forth between accounts because sometimes one couldn't hear. I guess they're in different parts of the courtroom or whatever. And so I was trying to bounce back and forth between accounts to figure out who was hearing things at the moment from where they were best. And I know Stefania Marizzi mentioned something about microphones being 20 years old or something. Mm-hmm. And they picked the smallest courtroom there was for when they knew it was going to be a lot of people. So no, I think it's absolutely by design. And they were just hoping that not enough people would bother and they could just do this all in secrecy. So I think it's very obvious.
Well, and I saw where the judge is aware of it,
Mhm.
so Misty Winston put on Twitter that the judge is a former MI6 member, was in the MI6. I mean, I find that very hard to believe. But the judge has pointed out a couple of things here, and he told the prosecuting attorney to take the papers or whatever
Mhm.
off their microphone in the courtroom, that it was being done on purpose to obscure the audio in this. I'm encouraging our viewers this morning to log on and put these comments and questions in here. And I want to get to them because, it's a busy work day for a lot of folks. This one is from Suzanne Murphy. She says that there were reports about a new strategy used by Attorney Summers, Julian's defense attorney. Can either guest explain this, as current reporting has been unclear? Well, I'm trying to follow this as well on Consortium News and other sources. Kevin Gastala is following it on his Dissenter newsletter. And I don't have an answer for this. Do either of you know anything about a new strategy?
I've seen the same reference, George, but no one has said what it is. And even on Democracy Now! This morning, Matt Kennard, who is with Declassified UK, who's been in the courtroom and was interviewed by Democracy Now! during the court's lunch break, he was asked this, and he didn't articulate it or go into any detail. So I'm not sure what that strategy is.
Well, I can only hope that it works, maybe better than what's worked.
I mean, the reports are that the judges were interested in this, but there are so many great people to be following and listening to on this. Kevin Gastala, who of course wrote one of the best books, who has been covering this for for a decade now. He was denied the ability to attend the trial, to be present as a journalist, as well as many others. Craig Murray is there in the courtroom. And Craig is a former ambassador for the UK. His writings on this and on a whole host of other topics are really essential. But one of the things that Craig gets at is how this could never be a fair trial because of the fact that there is no independent judiciary in the UK. They like to say that, but the reality is that those judges are part of the same establishment as the members of parliament. They're part of the same establishment as security services. And, just in his column he wrote today, he talks about those connections between the British security services and these judges, not the justice system in general there, not the Crown's justice system in general, but the judges that have been involved in Julian's case these last 5 years, and how, yes, the lead judge, she was a lawyer for MI6. So there's all these conflicts of interest that ordinarily you would say, this is ridiculous. Exactly. How can this go forward? But this is the establishment. And, this is what Julian is up against. We need to remind everybody that Julian stands there as an accused person, not as anyone who's been convicted of anything. And he has been held in Belmarsh now, the harshest prison in the UK, for 5 years on no charges other than this extradition request from the US. So just how much of a travesty this is, how much of a crime against humanity and against civilization this is by the British in deference to the Americans is historical. And to your point earlier, George, about this being the most important show you did in terms of, I think, historical significance, this certainly may be it.
Well, I want to do this before we get, because Matt mentioned this book. Now, if you look, let's see here, let me move the right way. If you just off what would be my right shoulder, that's Kevin Gastala's book. Get this thing, and you'll be all knowing, all Assange. That's what he's talking about, Kevin Gastala, and he's been a frequent guest on my show as well. Love this guy. But if you want to know what's going on, follow Kevin Gastala. I would also say, now we're going to run out of time, but the other thing that always strikes me as ironic about this thing in England and in Belmarsh in London with the Brits, you got to remember now, the First Amendment is the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. The British don't have a First Amendment. This is not as high a priority with them in their nations as it is with us here in the United States. They don't have any reason to hold us or uphold this like we do. And then secondly, you got to remember one of the biggest reasons that we're here, that the Matt knows this military stuff better than I do, that we fled Britain was because of the lack of First Amendment rights, which we enjoy in this country and which they still don't have. But Julian Assange's very life and the future of the First Amendment in the United States, to a certain extent, is in a British court of law. I just, that strikes me as totally bizarre. But I wanted to get to this again. Maybe we can go out with this as far as where Julian is. And what Gustavo is saying. Assange didn't attend the extradition appeal hearing in person or virtually because of his health. During a media briefing, it was mentioned Assange had excessive coughing. That's what Kelley was talking about. Broke a rib. Man, you got to really cough to break a rib. And a broken rib, I know from being a hockey guy, extremely painful and debilitating. He suffers from osteoporosis. Again, osteoporosis, how do you get that? Being locked up. Being indoors, not having exercise, not having proper food, not having sunlight to a certain extent. Another stark reminder that this is a matter of life and death. After nearly 5 years of detention in Belmarsh Prison, a facility sometimes referred to as Britain's Gitmo, Assange still hasn't bowed the U.S. government. He still refuses to accept a plea deal because of what it would mean for press freedom. Okay, Kelley, that's an excellent thing for you to talk about, because people don't really know the heroism of this guy. A lot of people say, they always start off with, well, maybe you don't like Julian Assange. And I don't know what they're getting at with that. But one thing you got to like is this man is not lacking for courage.
Yeah, but it's just so politicized. I mean, we all know the story. A lot of people still think right now that this indictment has something to do with 2016, which it doesn't.
Yes.
Right.
But so, I mean, I think people just, it's kind of shocking. When I first started reaching out to candidates for this project, I was kind of surprised that so many people still didn't know enough about the case. Some didn't know any, but, I expected that from the general public. I was a little surprised about the candidates, but, you don't hear, where are you going to hear about it unless you're actively seeking out independent media or reading Kevin Gostola's work. I mean, all you're going to hear is the smears and the misinformation about him. So I don't think people they don't really think it's even tied to that. They just know hacker, rapist. I mean, it's amazing how well that stuck.
And we're going to talk about those allegations a little bit later in the show too. So much of this, Matt, is this military thing that we talk about on my show all the time, this jingoism. I've got a U.S. representative here that represents me, Zach Nunn. I wrote to him about the Assange case, and the guy got back to me basically with this line that you've got to be sick to death of hearing this kind of perspective. But he says, I'm former military. And because of that, I uphold, the Constitution, and I hold the military most dear to my heart. I mean, I can't recite the thing exactly, but my God, it was embarrassing. And basically what he said is these intelligence ties that Assange is accused of circumventing, although I don't fully understand it, and it's very complicated, and all of this crap that they tell you all the time. For our effective to be military and to protect us, we have to protect these intelligence sources that Assange so undermined. I mean, you've seen and heard that trope a lot.
Yeah, but that man is in the U.S. Congress, and so you need to pay attention to him. But I mean, just in the first words of what he says to you, George, shows you that this is not a person who should be respected for his ability to think or for his knowledge. Whenever you hear people talk about how much they love the Constitution and the founding of our republic and what all that stands for, and then they go on about how great the military is, like that dissonance between, the men who actually wrote the Constitution and founded this country and their fear and disdain for standing armies. And then these people like Representative Nunn, who are triumphing the military. It's a dissonance that just it makes you crazy. But that is propaganda. That is jingoism. That is this this false patriotism used for political gain that we see so often throughout this country, not just on the federal level of politics or on the national level of our media, but at state and local levels as well. This idea that somehow WikiLeaks caused harm to the U.S. military is false, except for the fact that it exposed the U.S. military's wrongdoing. So it exposed the U.S. military's criminality. It exposed the U.S. military's arrogance, its hubris. It exposed the U.S. military's deceit. So that's the harm that was done in the U.S. military. Otherwise, there was no harm done. And we know there was no harm done because the United States government went to great lengths. A guy named General Robert Carr led a task force that included 20 different federal agencies, dozens and dozens of people assigned to this task force. And they went through everything that WikiLeaks released for years, looking to find any evidence of harm. They reached out to American allies, the Brits, the French, the Canadians, the Australians, et cetera, to see if they could find any harm that was done from these WikiLeaks releases. And there was no harm found. They lied about one person who was killed because they got it from an Afghan Taliban source. And it turns out that was false. That person wasn't even referenced in any of the WikiLeaks documents. And so we know this because the United States government had to go to court twice to say this. Once in the Chelsea Manning trial, where they had to say, yes, these releases caused no harm. We could find no harm done by these releases. And the second time was in Julian Assange's extradition hearing back in 2021 in the British court, where it had to be admitted that there was no harm done by these WikiLeaks releases. So these people like your Representative George, Representative Nunn, either, again, it's like, is he too dumb or is he in on it? Does he just not know this, or is he willing to lie about it?
Well, they're even they're even saying this. I was trying to find the exact tweet, but apparently they're still saying this now in the hearing today.
Yeah,
repeating that lie. But I wanted to say something about patriotism. And Matt, I think I'll probably play this clip on our next panel. There's a great podcast, an author named Chris Coyne. I believe he's a professor as well. The book is called In Search of Monsters to Destroy. And so I heard him on this podcast, and he says, great thing about patriotism, that this idea that you're not patriotic when you're criticizing the government and you're calling out the wrongdoing. It should be the exact opposite, like that, and we want things to be better, and that criticizing our government is being patriotic because we can do better. And then there's a guy that just resigned from the State Department not that long ago, Josh Paul, is that his name?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think we need to change that narrative too, that that's not patriotic, because it is. So I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
I think of Josh Paul. I think of his predecessor, Matthew Ho, resigning from the State Department because of that situation in Afghanistan. I also think about Max Blumenthal, and he's calling upon, obviously, more people like Josh Paul to resign over the situation, but then do something as well. Just don't resign. Do like Matt's doing. I mean, taking matters into your own hands and try to be an activist and try to get something done on this. And I wanted to, before we get too far along here, I want to talk about candidates for Assange and this excellent panel that you've put together, Kelley. And this article by Gastella is an excellent way of getting us there. Now, again, the reason I'm focusing so much on him, he's one of the foremost authorities on Assange. And he talks about how Julian Assange's last chance to avoid extradition is taking place right now in that London courtroom. I want to read this, and then we'll get to Kelley. The case has been widely condemned by civil liberties, human rights, and press freedom organizations. I don't know, my kind of folks, because the allegations against Assange criminalize him for engaging in standard news gathering activities. And this highlighting is mine. Yet the U.S. Justice Department under President Joe Biden has refused to heed calls, including from members of Congress, to drop the charges. So he ain't too dumb. Biden isn't. He's in on it. He knows all about this, folks. Journalists and media organizations throughout the world routinely ask potential sources to leak information that is in the public interest. At least 70, I didn't know this, at least 75 news gathering organizations operate a submission system called Secure Drop, this Dropbox. I knew about this. For one thing, he was trying to get information on Trump's taxes through this thing. I know that by the Freedom of the Press Foundation. That is similar to the submission system which WikiLeaks employs. Now, for anyone that has any doubt, and there are people like Kelley said, my God, it's hard to believe that people are still posting and saying this kind of stuff. There is no U.S. law against publishing classified information. Get that. No U.S. law against publishing classified information. Some people believe that there still is. No. The First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution is supposed to protect a person's right to publish information, even if the material was hacked or stolen. Think about the Pentagon Papers and the great Daniel Ellsberg and the travesty of the Vietnam War. Think about Ellsberg and his people standing over a photocopy machine, copying pages from that Rand report about what was going on in Vietnam and how we were being lied to and how tens of thousands of U.S. men and women were being slaughtered for no reason. That's what we're talking about here. It's completely legal. Only a political solution can end this case and prevent the U.S. government from doing further damage to freedom of the press. Okay, this highlighting is mine. I don't like to read this much, particularly when we have two guests on here. But this is going to take us to Kelley because, when Matt first ran for the U.S. Senate, I said, I don't know, Matt, shit, that doesn't seem to do any good. I mean, where are we going to get with this candidacy? Man, I wish you could get elected to the U.S. Senate. Hell, I wish you could get elected president. And Matt said, we can't cede this part of the process, this piece of the puzzle to the people that are against us. We have to attack this on all fronts, Kelley. And that's what you're doing with candidates for Assange on the internet with this panel, with this YouTube thing that you're doing. So talk about that and talk about why you're doing it. Kevin Gustola seems to support it in this article.
Well, I've gotten some pushback. There are a lot of people that feel like, electoral politics, there's no point in trying. And I disagree with that. I do think it is a huge hurdle, obviously. But I mean, it's power in numbers. And when you start talking to people and you start hearing the same things repeated, whether they're in California or Colorado or Florida, these panels show that our government is not representing the people, what they really want. And these candidates are much more in line with what their constituents want. And so let's see, it's not one panel. We've 16 candidates so far. Actually, we have two new ones showing up so far, maybe 4, Matt. We have a couple that want to return because it's big news this week, obviously. But so we're trying to add more and more, and we were just getting started. So I think obviously, we want to see the charges dropped, but as Matt and I talked on Misty Winston's show, even if, which would be wonderful, he's set free, this issue of press freedom is not over. I mean, there are so many other cases, there are so many other battles, and I think, even though it's titled Candidates for Assange, it's really about all of our civil liberties, our right to transparency in government. And so, I'd like to continue with it. It's very inspiring to me to talk to all these people across the country that are brave enough to take this on, to try to run for office. I think we need, obviously it is an uphill battle, and we have to change the narrative that a third party or an independent candidate can't win, because it is possible. We still have so many people that don't even vote. And, so many people there are more independents than ever. So it is possible, but it's a battle for sure.
Well, one ally is another ally. I mean, regardless of where they come from. I don't know, Matt, how do you feel about that political run and that experience that you had with politics in North Carolina? I mean, that was an abhorrent process with you trying to be blocked to valid access and all that stuff. How do you feel about it in retrospect now?
I think, and for people who aren't familiar, I ran with the Green Party for the U.S. Senate in North Carolina in 2022, and we had to get on a ballot. We had to get the party recognized as a party in North Carolina. We did the process. We got the signatures, and then we had to go to federal court because the Democratic Party, conniving with the state board of elections, which was controlled by the Democratic Party because the governor here is a Democrat, blocked us. They falsely accused us of fraud, and we had to go to federal court. We won in federal court, and then we had to go to federal appeals court because the Democratic Party took us to federal appeals court over that. We won in federal appeals court, and then we also would have won in state court if the North Carolina Democratic Party had gone through with their lawsuit against it, but they dropped that once we won in federal appeals court. But what that tells me, though, and I think what that should inform others, is that they saw it as a threat. They saw this as a big deal. The established parties saw this as something significant enough to become fully involved and spend millions and millions and millions of dollars to try and block us, to try and keep us off the ballot. They did it for several reasons. First and foremost, to protect the interests of their big donors. Right. So to protect the interests of the pharmaceutical industry, to protect the interests of the healthcare industry, to protect the interests of the fossil fuel industries and the weapons industries. Right. So, understanding it that way, that they see this as a threat, that they see Bobby Kennedy's run, Cornel West's run, Jill Stein's run, whoever the libertarians put up this year. They see that as enough of a threat to make it almost impossible for them to run. And that's why ballot access is so difficult throughout the country. In that whenever you see various forms or various examples of campaign finance reform and election reform coming through the U.S. Congress, it very often takes away from the abilities of third parties and independents to run for office. It makes it harder for them to do so. So I think that's one of the ways to look at it, George, is it's not so much what we think about it, but we see what they think about it. The two major parties think about it, two corporate parties think about it, and why this is why they're so obsessed with Julian Assange. What threat does he pose to them by, showing, hey, some of it too with this threat by Assange is just the nature of the technology that distributed the threat. And that's one of the reasons why I think you see the major media not standing behind Assange the way they should, right? In spite of the very real threat to themselves from a successful prosecution of Julian. So I think you have these major media outlets looking at this as seeing a way that potentially we can use this to our advantage, so that people like Julian Assange, people on YouTube, people on Twitter, people like Podcast by George, they're the ones affected by this, but not us, because we're real journalists. And so, you see how the establishment, the elements of the establishment, the members of the establishment support one another, just as we were discussing with the judges who are hearing Julian's appeal case today, how they are part of the establishment and they are going to do what's best for the members of the establishment to their left, to the members of the establishment to their right, to the members of the establishment that they went to school with, that they go to dinner with, that they attend Christmas parties with, et cetera.
Yeah, that's well said. I've said that as well. It's kind of self-protection by the mainstream media, the old school form of media protecting itself, because Julian Assange was scooping the shit out of them, and just not on small things, on the biggest things that you're in journalism for, which is what your government is doing in these wars and this type of thing. He was killing it with WikiLeaks, and they knew that. And he was also making them and their proxies, or whichever way you want to look at the flow of information, the government sources look really bad. And so now they look at it and say, or try to tell us that he's not a journalist, that he's not a publisher. Well, not in that old school way that you're referring to. No. But we're talking about the digital era here, which has been around for a few decades now, folks. I mean, times are changing. And if you don't think so, look at the subscription rates for these major publications. People have completely moved away from that. The death knell sounded some time ago, and it's because of this new form of publishing that Julian Assange is a part of. And how important is this? And Kelley, you mentioned Misty Winston. You guys were on that show. I encourage everybody to go there and take a look at the show and listen to the show on TNT Radio with Misty Winston that Matt and Kelley were on here just a couple of weeks ago.
Mhm.
But this is what Misty says. And man, this couldn't state it better. She's great on Twitter. You got to use few words. And man, she does. Misty says, and by the way, Comrade Misty is Putin's buddy. That's a joke, folks. I mean, when I was growing up and we had a couple of sayings as kids, one of them was don't hurt yourself because we were doing all kinds of things that probably would. And then the other thing was anybody that was, a crybaby or carrying on, we used to say, fuck them if they can't take a joke. This is a joke. It doesn't, her name is, she's not Putin's buddy. Come on. This has to do with Russia phobia and all this, Russiagate stuff and all that type of thing. But anyway, Misty says, it doesn't matter what you care about. Free Palestine, education, ending the war machine. How about healthcare? How about the environment? How about immigration? Are these things that have got you all bound up? Are these things that you care about? You can't fight. You can't change things if you can't speak. What's happening to Assange impacts every other fight we face. Free Assange. Okay, Kelley, I know this is something you want to talk about. Take it away.
Oh, I just wanted to say that I think, WikiLeaks is such a huge threat because you've had many decades of, liberals, the Democrats not paying attention to the wars. There's not been a real anti-war movement. Colleen Rowley was another great guest on Assange Countdown to Freedom, and she talked out on that show about a recipe concocted for perpetual war. And it talks about, Matt, I'm sure you're familiar with that one. But, it talks about how people have been in the dark. And I myself was one of those people. I voted for Obama twice. And I had this moment. I used to watch Real Time with Bill Maher. And Jeremy Scahill was on, and he had just written a book about drone strikes. And I remember this panel, he's talking to them, and they're just kind of like, oh, we don't want to hear about that. And there was just this kind of ignoring all of that. And I think why WikiLeaks is such a threat is because it changes that. And I'm seeing a lot more crossover now between I don't know, I guess Greens and libertarians. I don't like all the labels, but for lack of better explanation, where you start to see more of people that maybe Dem exited, that now they're paying attention to Scott Horton's podcast. They're listening to libertarians and getting more involved in the anti-war movement. And so WikiLeaks was, crucial in pulling back that curtain and letting everyone see. Because, I'm one of those people. I was busy. I was a mom. I wasn't paying attention, and I didn't know a lot of this stuff. So it was in 2016, and after the primary was rigged against Bernie, and I ended up voting for Jill Stein, though I will say I voted for Nader many years ago. But I think that's really what it is it pulls back that secrecy. Is just gone, and so people can't just be clueless about what we do around the globe. So
we were moving along on the same astral plane and didn't know it. I was approaching retirement in those years that you talked about. I saw Bernie in 2016, and then Bernie ran and he endorsed the candidate in 2016, and then 2020 he ran against Biden, and I covered his first appearance here in Iowa, of course, because of the Iowa caucuses. And the first words out of his mouth was, I'll support the Democratic nominee, who, no matter who it is. I looked at him, what the hell? What kind of way is that to start a campaign, And that really kind of opened my eyes about what's going on in this country with these political parties and with Bernie in particular. And I'm extremely disillusioned now with Bernie. I think he's a sheep herder. I think he's a Judas goat. You know what that is? You look it up in the dictionary. I don't know what the hell he was thinking of or what he was doing, but the guy completely dropped the ball when it came to a movement that he appeared to have at one point in time. I don't want to take off or get going too much on Bernie today, but I wanted to bring this
up. He did start something, though. That was
yes, he did start something
that really woke a lot of people up, myself included. So, I think that is a moment for a lot of us. So.
Let me see if I can get this to come up on screen here. All right, so this is no, this is just my tweet on Twitter, but it's important. This is kind of how I look at it. My journalism professors, you got to remember now, I'm old. I go way back, but these folks, this was in the era even before Watergate, or right in that era was when I was in school. I talked about Ellsberg and all that type of thing. My journalism professors must be rolling over in their graves with the ongoing persecution of Assange. The digital world and AI mean that our rights to try to identify and safeguard truth are now more valuable than ever. We respond by allowing this, and I'm talking about the persecution of Assange in this trial. My God, what in the hell are we doing? I can see my journalism professors, screaming from the lectern about this type of thing. And I'm ultimately extremely dismayed in the journalism community, but, mainstream journalists in particular, about how they don't seem to get it. I mean, they're not speaking up, but a lot of them have grown up in this era of propaganda and Hollywood and media, and they believe differently. A lot of them are careerists. Perhaps some of them are too dumb. Some of them are in on it because of their contacts and how they get their stories and that type of thing. But I am shocked and appalled, maybe, next to our politicians, by our journalists. It is extremely why they're not lining up more than they are.
Well, they're stenographers
heart,
for
yeah.
power.
Yes.
As Pilger said.
Yeah, the great John Pilger. That's great. Okay, let me bring this up on screen here. Now, this is a is a letter to the. Okay, talk about this, Kelley.
Oh yeah, so this is a letter, McGovern. Let's see, November. Yes, letter to Biden that most, I think, if not all of the squad signed, saying to drop the charges against Assange. And then strangely, I mean, it's you've got both Republicans and Democrats here, but then they just kind of seem to drop the ball and have not signed on to House Resolution 934. I was just in DC last week, and I went around and I targeted. I only got to see one Republican candidate. You mostly, if anybody's walked the halls of congressional offices, you mostly just meet the interns at the front, offices. But I went to each one of these and dropped off some paperwork from Assange Defense Boston. But I was trying to reach those that, like, why did you sign here and then not sign House Resolution 934? So AOC, Cori Bush, all those people. So I don't know if it made any impact, but hopefully hopefully the case will be dropped, but if not, hopefully more are going to sign on to that.
Yeah, and as far as what's happening right now, anybody that's watching, obviously while I'm doing the show, I have my hands full just running the show for guys. But if you're looking at Twitter right now, because they're wrapping up out there, they're 6 hours ahead of us, I think they are. So like the day's proceedings should be over with. If there's something happening that we need to know about and you're watching, just put it in the comments section and I'll bring it up on screen. Now, I learned a day or two ago, actually, that we're not going to know any outcome of this for some time. Is that your understanding as well, Matt?
Yeah, that's right. Well, it's uncertain. It's uncertain. They could rule immediately, or they could take a couple days, or they could take a couple weeks. It's uncertain. There's no deadline where they have to rule by, from what I understand. And then as well, is if he is found able to be extradited, they have 30 days to extradite him. But the assumption is that they will extradite him immediately. They will bundle him up. They will take Julian, put him on a plane, fly him to the U.S. as quickly as possible. And that's because there is an appeal process through the European Court of Human Rights that can be addressed. The idea being, though, by quickly getting him to the U.S., that would make that null and void, basically. So could they abscond with him fast enough to not have the petition heard in the European Court of Human Rights? There's also some doubt as to whether or not the British would accept the jurisdiction of the European Court in this matter, in spite of all the treaties and British law as well that say they should be doing that. If they find in favor of Julian, my understanding is that this case then goes back to trial. So that's my understanding, is that it's not If these two judges rule in favor of the appeal, it's to allow an appeal hearing or appeal case to begin. It's not setting him free. That's my understanding what occurs if they rule in favor.
So
Okay.
the process is the punishment. I mean, can you just
Right.
imagine, you know?
That's
I mean, we
exactly
were
right.
locked
Yeah.
up for COVID, you know, a lot of we
Yes.
were locked down for a while. Imagine that times 5, you know?
And that's why it's viewed successfully as a success in many ways, because just what they've done to Julian over the last 12 years is enough to put the fear into
Mhm.
journalists, to put the fear into those who want to speak truth to
Yes.
power, that this could happen to them. And of course, then it has the reinforcing fact on those that you rightly described as stenographers, Kelley, right? The journalists of the mainstream press, those who are part of the establishment we were talking about before, where that just reinforces their own determination to be on the government side. Because this way, as
Mhm.
long as I'm being good, nothing
Mhm.
bad can happen to me.
Mhm.
Right. And then that's how you create an institution like our corporate press that is exactly that, just a stenographer for those in power, because they want to, they're going to go along and get along kind of thing. And then the other aspect of this is that even if, say, the appeal is approved, the appeal is ultimately approved, Julian is ultimately set free. I think the way the U.S. government looks at this is that that's not a defeat. All that means that the British court didn't extradite him on some technicality. There is
Mhm.
no U.S. court ruling, particularly Supreme Court ruling, saying that what the U.S. government was doing was illegal or unconstitutional or wrong. So I think even if Julian does walk free from this danger does not go away at all.
Mhm.
It still exists, and they look for the next person or institution to utilize these powers against, because they still have these powers.
Right.
I just cannot believe that exactly what you're talking about. Time served. I mean, what he's already suffered and endured. My God, haven't you gotten your pound of flesh? Particularly when you consider what that Carr guy said, that Pentagon spokesperson, about nobody being harmed by that. And to underline that, the Associated Press ran around and interviewed a bunch of their contacts, a bunch of people that were named. But I don't think Assange was the guy that named him. It was probably that release by the Guardian people. But in the information that came out and said, were you harmed? Did you fear for your life? Did anything happen to you? Nothing. Not a single person said that anything had happened to him because of this. And it's such a thing that in this country, nobody's paying attention, but they are in London. I wanted to play this clip. This was
One
just
quick
off a
thing,
phone. I
George,
think it was Stella Assange. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to bring up how we speak of Julian's case primarily as a First Amendment case, but we have to realize what's been going on in
Yes.
parallel has been this assault on the Fourth Amendment as well. This is what people like Thomas Ham and Ed Snowden have, blown the whistle on, have exposed the government's subversion of our rights to privacy. So you have the government clearly showing that we will go after you if you expose information that we don't want you to expose. And they're also showing that we have the tools and the willingness to use those tools to violate your privacy, to break into, to hack, to monitor, to surveil everything you do. We know because of WikiLeaks, we know they can use our televisions to spy on us. So they have this ability, this power, these tools, and this willingness to spy in order to ensure their censorship works. So this gets back to Orwell's 1984, where he talks about how the government has the ability to listen and to watch everybody. It doesn't do that because it doesn't need to. It just has to get everyone to understand that they can. And so people then modify their behavior. And we've seen this already. I mean, going back basically a decade now, Penn America, who have been absolutely terrible on these issues, particularly on Julian's case, but also on Ed Snowden's case. But Penn America, unlike Penn International, which has been really great about this, but Penn America, because they want to make sure they're able to interview Barack Obama, right? And things like that. But they did a survey about 10 years ago where they asked journalists whether or not Ed Snowden's revelations, the fact that the government can see everything you're doing and does do that, has had an effect on their work. And a majority of journalists said, yes, that has had a chilling effect on my work. That causes me to hesitate. That causes me to reconsider what I'm going to do. That causes me to self-censor. So we have to really look at this assault on Julian, on the free press, on the First Amendment in conjunction with their assault on the Fourth Amendment.
So you mentioned Kevin Gustola's work several times. He wrote about the case Joshua Schulte, I think. He was the one that leaked the Vault 7 stuff to WikiLeaks. And something really alarming in Kevin's write-up about that was that in these cases, the Department of Justice is viewing any use of like privacy tools as evidence of criminality. Like the thought of that, like what? Because you're using a VPN, or because if you try to, be too private, then you're guilty.
Right.
That should scare everyone. I just think most people don't know. They don't, they just don't know about it. So.
Right. Yeah. For example, on your iPhones now, there's a way to change the settings so that you get some verification that your text message is going only to the person you send it to, so no third party can intercept it, right? Based upon what we saw in the Schulte trial, would that be could the U.S. government say, because you had this setting turned on, that's an indication that you're up to no good, right? Because why would you want to hide anything if, right? I mean, like, this is where we're going with this.
All right, we're just about out of time here. I wanted to play a couple of clips. Now, this first clip, people have seen this before. They've seen it on my show. It's been around a lot. But I want people to think of this in the context of what we're talking about today. On one side, you have the United States and their proxies, the Brits, trying to get Assange over here to try him for espionage. And on the other side, you have Assange, who can't even go to trial to defend himself because of the torture that he's been enduring in WikiLeaks, who's never been found to have lied or distorted or been wrong or had to retract anything. Okay, this is the side. This is a representative of the United States. This is a former CIA director. This is somebody that was after Assange. These are the people that are responsible for his being in Belmarsh right now. This is this bag of guts that I talk about, Pompeo, who was in Iowa testing the waters to run for president, for God's sake. But look at it in this new light. Think about the two sides in front of a judge right now. This is the U.S.
When I was a cadet, what's the cadet motto at West Point? You will not lie, cheat, or steal, or tolerate those who do. I was the CIA director. We lied, we cheated, we stole. It was like we had entire training courses. It reminds you of the glory of the American experiment.
That's hilarious.
Okay. Yeah, and he's in court.
Right. I mean, that's what's so disturbing is the way the audience laughs and applauds.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's a joke, but not everybody is in this camp. And before we leave, I got to play this because this is a clip. I think it's from Stella Assange's cell phone. But going into the court, or into through the gates yesterday. I mean, I talk to people here in this country. They don't even know who Julian Assange is. The people that I'm talking to, they're not aware of this case, let alone the overwhelming significance when it comes to our most precious First Amendment rights. But they care in some place. Watch this. God love them. And I know you are both long-term activists and have been holding the banner for Julian Assange. And Kelley, this has got to be particularly gratifying for you to see crowds when they turn out like this because of your efforts to get these politicians to step up and be somebody, as we used to say, again, when I was a kid, when it comes to Julian Assange.
Well, as I was standing on the overpass at I-40 yesterday with Ray McGovern, I looked at him and I said, the first time I met you in person was in DC. I believe it was 2018, out in front of the British Embassy. And cars were driving by and someone yelled out, "Kill him." and it wasn't very positive response. But yesterday
My
we got
God.
a lot of really great, I mean, people honking and thumbs up, and it was gratifying. So it there's still a long way to go. There are still a lot of people that don't know, but we have moved the needle a bit. And my hope is with this candidates for Assange, we're, spreading it, like across the country. And Matt's always great about asking them, what are you doing in your campaign to sort of broach this subject with them. But that's what we hope to do is just get these conversations going. And the candidates, some of them, they don't know and they just want to come on and listen. And we have one guy that he's going to come back. So you want to just come on and listen and hear more. And each panel is a little different depending on who we have on. So we covered different aspects of the case. So,
well, check it out. And before we leave here, I got to say, and I'm reminded of these different things, but Medea Benjamin, the great Medea Benjamin, also been on my show. She put on Twitter today, they're running around out there, in the U.S. Capitol trying to get these representatives to step up and be somebody when it comes to Gaza. She's got a clip on there, some innocuous representative. I don't even know who the hell the guy is. And I mean, he knows he's being mic'd and videoed, and he's talking about Palestine and Gaza. He says, I think we ought to kill them all.
oh, yeah.
Guy's dead serious, Matt. This reminds me of what you talk about. Some of these people are psychopaths. My God, who says that type of thing on camera? This dude did.
Yeah, I look. It's Andy Aguilas from Tennessee, and if
okay.
people want to go down a rabbit hole of madness and despair and anger, just read this guy's Wikipedia profile. This is the consequence of having a money-driven political system, is that you have somebody like this who is a psychopath, who has clearly, through his behavior over the years, exhibited that he, at the very least, is a liar consistently. Lies all the time, as well as his decision making, as well as his personal and business life. This is not a person who should be in elected office, objectively. But with the political system we have, with the money-driven politics we have, this is who we get, because it doesn't have to do about the character of the person running. It doesn't have to do with their integrity, their competence, their experience, their intelligence, what have you. It's only got to do is if they will be willing puppets for the establishment, for the money. And this is what you get then. And as we get back to this conversation about the establishment, he knows what's best for him. He knows what's best is to support the CIA. He knows what's best is to support the U.S. Justice Department. He knows what's best is to go along with this extradition of Julian Assange, because that's where the power lies. So he's going to do whatever he needs to make sure he stays in that position of power, to have, if not power, to have proximity to power. And because he's willing to do that, the money will line up behind him. And then that's how you get guys like that in the halls of Congress.
Well, we're just about out of time. We're coming up on the top of the hour. I had another clip. Maybe I'll play this when we wrap up here, after we wrap up, just to take the show out. It's Claire Daly speaking yesterday. Again, I'm a huge fan of Claire Daly, a real hero of mine. I've had her on the show before. I want to play that clip, but I want to wrap up the hour here and Matt knows that I do this all the time, Kelley. I like to give our guests the last word, because they've earned it, so to speak. So give us a last word here from your perspective.
Oh gosh, I don't know. I just want to encourage people to keep talking about Assange. Do you meet someone running for office? Ask them. Bring it up with candidates. So that's my last word. I want to see this be successful. I wanted to see these candidates really have a shot, and I think that the more that, again, it's power in numbers, and courage is contagious, and hopefully that will win over money.
That's great. Again, Matt, before I play this Claire Daly video, and it's 3 minutes in length, people can watch as much or as little of that as they want, but it's great stuff. Give us a close here.
I would say I'd ask people to do two things. One, call the New York Times, call whatever media you're following, and ask them why they're not covering this in more detail, and also as well in a more objective manner. And I also say call your members of Congress and ask them to support House Resolution 934. which is the House resolution in support of Julian Assange. So it's House Resolution 934. Do that today, because they will respond if the pressure is enough. If we get enough mass that there's actual political leverage here, members of Congress will respond. So certainly, please call your members of the House, especially, and ask them to support House Resolution 934.
That's great stuff. Kelley Lane and Matthew Ho, thanks for being on this edition, this segment anyway, of Podcast by George. I'm going to play this video by Claire Daly, and I'll wrap it up there. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, George.
All right. So, yeah, as I mentioned, I'm going to play this video. And folks, if you enjoy this type of show, this type of information, and seeing people like this that are kindred spirits for me, and I know that they are for most of the audience as well, please, if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, subscribe, sign up, follow us if you haven't already. Give us that thumbs up, leave a comment if you would like on the video platforms, and then go to podcastbygeorge.com. If you just want to get audio feeds of the show, long form podcasts in audio, you can do that at podcastbygeorge.com. But as promised, here's this video with Claire Daly. Watch this and we'll talk again soon. Claire Daly, take it away.
We represent the voices of truth, the voices of freedom, and the voices of resistance. And that is why Julian Assange is in that court. Now we know that what is at stake here is not the life of a man, although the life of a man is at stake, and that is incredibly important, and we never lose sight of it for a minute. But more than that, it is the defense of freedom of speech, of freedom of association, a stance against the criminalization of journalism. That is what we are here. And how absolutely outrageous is it that an exemplary journalist, and we heard the evidence in the court today, a journalist whose work in exposing war crimes, renditions, torture, criminality resulted in those awful things being changed and stopped, that he's the one in prison, and the people committing that are walking the streets doing gigs for Israel or whatever the hell Tony Blair does. So the chilling effect is here. We know that. They say if Julian is sent to America, the chilling effect will silence other journalists. It has already been here for the past 12 years. So I think it is very fitting that we're here against the backdrop of the appalling atrocities and the live stream genocide in Gaza. We know that also where a civilian in prison population is being targeted. We also know the Ukraine war is going on without end, because that's what NATO want. And I just want you to remind you of the words of Julian when he talked about the war in Afghanistan. And he said that these wars are about flushing the money from the tax bases of the US and the EU through Afghanistan and back into the bank accounts of the military-industrial complex. It's not about winnable war, it's about endless war. How true he was. And therefore, that voice, that very special voice that he had, is needed now more than ever, because it's not just about silencing the peace movement, it's about journalism, it is about silencing the peace movement. So let's remember also that if wars can be started by lies, peace can be started by the truth. You're all here on the side of truth, so is Julian. We'll be all here tomorrow, and we will not rest until justice prevails.
Here, the great Claire Daly. Now she's representing Ireland in the European Parliament. I've had her on my show before. My God, is that any good? But folks, that's going to wrap it up. That's all there is. And there ain't no more. That's another podcast by George.